Hello everybody, welcome back to the Kerbal space program. This is going to be the beginning of our mission, manned mission to Duna to land probes on the surface of the planet and its moon, Ike. This commentary is post-recording. I did do live commentary, and in listening to it after it was recorded, I didn't think it was that great, so I was going to do post-commentary over top of it in hopes of doing better. So anyway, the spaceship that you see on the screen is the one that we're going to be taking to Duna. It is different than the space tug that I was previously showing. I did try to use the space tug, and the one nuclear engine on it didn't have nearly as much thrust as I had hoped, and I ended up using most of the fuel to do an escape maneuver from Kerbin and was not able to rendezvous successfully with Duna, and the ship and everything associated with it was lost. So we'll add those Kerbals to the long list of Kerbals that I've destroyed in this space program. So this ship is very similar to the unmanned probes that I have sent to Duna. It is in Kerbin orbit right now, so it is all launched and set up and just waiting to orient and do its Kerbin escape maneuver. It has 5 probes attached to it, 3 nuclear engines, and as you can see, it's orbiting right now. So let's skip ahead to where we do our escape maneuver. Here you should see the ship in orbit. It's an equatorial orbit, which is nice for interplanetary missions. The closer you can get to the elliptical of the solar system, the disk, the better you will be going between planets. And an equatorial orbit of Kerbin is a good start. So I have the protractor open right here. We want to wait until the theta which is the first column, gets to 0, which will be the optimal start time for a mission to Duna. So as you can see, I'm going to expand time or extend time, advance time, speed up time, whatever the proper term is. Now it's going to be a little bit slow to do it for a ship in orbit, so you'll see that I'm going to create a lander on the ground with a protractor on it and just let that sit until it's ready. So go into the vehicle assembly building, and then this is the ship I used to launch to orbit. And actually, I think I just used this ship right here. I just put another one on the landing pad or launch pad and put it out there and use the protractor mod, because when you're on the launch pad, you can go up to maximum time dilation, I guess is the proper term. Today's post-commentary is brought to you by caffeine-free Diet Pepsi, which is probably close to drinking colored water. For some reason, now that I'm old, I'm more sensitive to caffeine, so I've switched to like 50-50 caffeine-free soda. So here you can see I've sped up time to maximum, and I'm waiting for the Duna time to tick down to 0 for theta. So I'm going to skip ahead and do that. So here you can see our Duna theta is approaching 0, and I dial back the speed down to a more reasonable amount once it gets closer. So you can see we're down to about 1.5 degrees right now. And yes, here we go, just going down to a relatively slow time scale. So it's not quite 0 yet. It'll take me a little bit to set up the orbit, but I figure or the maneuver, I should say, I figure it is close enough. And what is that thing right there? Okay, that's the Greek letter psi, P-S-I. I thought that was something else, but it is a psi. So theta shows you the relationship between the 2 planets, which you want to be 0, and then the psi shows you where in your orbit of your current location, which is Kerbin, do you want to be to launch to the other planets. So you want that to be as close to 0 as possible, and that tracks your orbit around the planet so that you start your burn at the right place. So that's what we are going to do here. So we're going to go back to the Space Center and go back to the ship in orbit, because we were on the ground to extend our time frame, or our compressed time. And here we are back in space. So from here, what I want to do is set up a maneuver that will take me to Duna. I think that's a bit of hit or miss. I understand most of the principles involved. Certainly there's a ton of math, which Protractor takes care of behind the scenes, which is nice. But, you know, looking at the tutorials and Scott Manley's stuff and, you know, other stuff on YouTube, I'm sure there's a bunch of people that do this. The basic rule of doing an orbit is if you want to affect an orbit, you do the burn on the other side of the object you're orbiting. So I kind of take that here, where you want to burn on the opposite side of Duna to extend out your apoasis to a Kerbin escape maneuver. So I'll start setting up the... Well, actually, I'm waiting for it to tick down. So we're right about where we want to be to start the burn based upon the protractor. So I'm setting Duna as the target. And then adding a maneuver, and then I'm just burning out prograde, right? And then there's my escape trajectory. And then the escape trajectory turns into a solar orbit, because as soon as you leave Kerbin's influence, you're captured by the sun. You have to go much further to be captured by Duna, obviously. So here I'm just changing the location of the maneuver node to move the solar orbit in such a manner that it intersects Duna's orbit. And I think, I'm not entirely sure, but I think what you want to do is you want to meet up with it basically on the other side of the solar system for maximum efficiency. You can see there's a relatively decent encounter right here. You can see me playing with it back and forth. One thing you do want to make sure is if you're not on the elliptical, you want to correct that so you are, because that'll be a big margin of error on the other side of the solar system. So I think for this orbit, as you can see right here, I am on the elliptical perfectly, which is unusual for me at least. So it's just a question of playing with the maneuver node to line things up. Now I think what you want to do here, and you'll see later on in the video this didn't come out exactly as planned, what you want to do is you want to exactly intersect with the planet's orbit so that you don't go past it, because that's wasted energy, I would assume. Plus you'll be going faster than you need to when you reach it, so that you'll need to do more slowing down, as it were, when you get to the planet. And you can see more fiddling back and forth with the encounters. It's much harder to do a planetary rendezvous than one of the moons, I must say. Because you don't want to go around more than once. And if you miss, it's going to be a long time before you get anywhere close. So as you can see, I was playing around with the location of the burn maneuver, the escape maneuver. And I think right here, do I get an intersect? Look how close that is. There you go. There's an intersect right there. And you can see it's basically on the other side of the solar system. So I think that's an optimal maneuver right there. As you'll see later on, it doesn't quite work out that way. But I think that's an optimal maneuver for intersecting Duna. So as you can see, we need to add just over 1,040 meters per second delta V. So my orbit speed is 2,100 and change meters per second. So we have to increase that by 50% to achieve escape velocity. So I think what I'm doing right here is I'm seeing how long I'm within the influence of Duna. The longer you're within the influence of Duna, I believe, the better your rendezvous is, and the less you'll spend on a braking maneuver. So I'm just kind of double checking if we can make it any better. And as you can see, I have to go around one more time before I will be in proper position for the burn. So I'm setting up setting up the direction, and then I'll just go around the planet once. I think do I use the alarm clock here? I do have the alarm clock and the protractor installed. These are the two mods I have. Yeah, here comes the alarm clock. To just as a test, to set an alarm for this. Let's see if I actually do it. I've recorded this some time ago, and I haven't gotten around to doing post-commentary, so yes, here comes the alarm clock. I do need a new version of this, apparently, but what I have works pretty well. This actually works really nice. You can see it slow down the game in advance of the actual alarm time so you don't miss it. So it's actually pretty neat. You can see it step down the time dilation. So I don't trust the burn indicator, so I think I have the alarm go off 15 minutes early so that I can get a head start on the burn. With a burn this big, correct me if I'm wrong, you want to have half the burn before the node and maneuver node, and half the burn after the node. So I'm giving myself 15 seconds, or 15 minutes rather, of lead time to the burn point. I think I do a test fire here because I don't trust the estimated burn time. I think I do a test fire here just to see what it says. So it says 6 minutes. To be honest, when I had one nuclear engine with the previous spaceship, it said 16 minutes again, and I swear it was like a 25-minute burn. So you'll see that I don't trust this, and I think I start up a little bit early, which may cause some of the margin of error that you'll see later on in the mission. So we're just going around, getting a little bit closer. Let's see. So I have it about 10 minutes beforehand. And you can see we're throttling up and beginning the burn a little bit early. And what I do is I watch the counter tick down because, like, if it starts at 6 minutes and it stays at 6 minutes, then it's not really 6 minutes. So I was kind of doing the burn early and just watching the counter tick down just to see if it was actually accurate in this instance. There's a new version out. This is recorded in version, I think, 0.20.1. I think 0.21 is out. So I'll probably finish up the mission in the current version and then upgrade to the new version. There is a breaking change in this where I think they retextured the surface of the planets and moons. So I don't think the save game files are compatible, but that's okay. I may just start the program over, my space program over in that version. And it'll give me a chance to do some stuff over that I probably could do better now than I have previously, such as, you know, creating a space station and stuff like that. So as you can see right now, since we're burning a little bit early, we're actually pointed directly at the planet. So maybe that's not ideal, but it does take quite a bit of burn, especially with the nuclear engines, to get some velocity up. So everybody does say that the nuclear engines are super efficient. I guess the ion engines may be even more, but I think it's almost impossible to use those for any payload lifting other than like teeny tiny probes. They're super efficient, but they take a while to get there. So we're going to skip ahead to the end of the maneuver so you don't have to sit here and watch it burn. So here we are towards the end of the maneuver. As you can see, we are getting close to our Delta V target. And you can see the apoapsis extending away from Kerbin very nicely. And you can see now we have escape velocity. You can see that the orbit isn't exactly the same as what was planned in the maneuver node, but it's close. So we're continuing to burn now that we still have escape velocity, but now we have to push our solar orbit out towards the Duna to intersect Duna's orbit. So you can see that's happening here. And you can see how little thrust it actually takes to move from Kerbin's orbit to Duna's orbit once you actually have escape velocity. It's pretty neat that you need so much massive thrust. Like, you need so much thrust to get from Kerbin's surface to Kerbin orbit. And then once you get in there, it's relatively fine-tuning. And then you need so much thrust to get Kerbin escape velocity. But once you do that, then it's relatively fine-tuning too. So you can see it's pretty much where it should be, and I don't think I actually get an intersect right here. So I think what I do is I delete the maneuver node to get it out of the way, and then I can see what's going on. As you can see, the engines are throttled down now. So it's close to where I wanted it, but not quite, which is disappointing, but I think that's just the margin of error in the burn. I guess it happens, but so I don't have an intersect with my actual orbit where the planned trajectory had an intersect. And actually in my unmanned missions, I don't think I ran into this problem. I did have a problem with one unmanned mission where I screwed up a burn because I didn't use alarm clock, and I ended up going past Duna and had to back up to it. But you can see me here doing an adjustment burn to try and fix the orbit between Kerbin and Duna. And maybe doing the orbit or the burn closer to Kerbin would have been better. I honestly don't know. If I was not on the solar elliptic, doing it at that point would be optimal for ironing out the orbit intersect with Duna. But as you can see, I had some trouble intersecting with the planet. And you can see my proposed orbit based upon this maneuver. So I have an intersect there, which is much, much sooner than was planned. And you can see my orbit will take me out way past Duna. I have all this extra velocity that I'm adding, unnecessary velocity that I'm adding to the ship to achieve orbit there. So it is certainly not ideal. And I think what I do is I end up going back and forth trying to get a better intersect before deciding to use that one, because that is another 500 some meters of delta V, which I'm going to have to burn and really should not be necessary. So this is not an optimal maneuver by any stretch of the imagination. I do have enough fuel, and I do have unmanned ships with fuel and docking ports, which this ship has, orbiting Duna. So even if I use more than half of my fuel, I can refuel at Duna to get back. So I'm sure there's a way to fix this maneuver so that I don't have to go that far past Duna. Because I can get close, but I can never, with my current position, I can never match up to Duna. And it looks like, based upon where the maneuver nodes are, that I am getting there too late. Because Duna is in front of me. Because you can see that's me, right? And then the other one is Duna. So it's actually ahead of me. I'm getting there too late. So I don't know where I went wrong, but it appears that I'm not going to get there in time. So the easiest way to fix it, perhaps not the best way, is just dump a lot of speed on and then intersect Duna much sooner. Now this also complicates the Duna rendezvous because I'll have all this extra speed I have to get rid of when I get to the planet. So you can see I'm still trying to come up with the best possible intersection at this point in time. Now it's possible I could go out beyond Duna and then catch it again on the flip side, but it's not showing me any markers there as far as where Duna would be. Hopefully that's improved on the next version, because I found it a little bit iffy in this version, where Duna would be on when I go past its orbit on my way back to where I started at Kerbin in my solar orbit. So I think right here I've decided this is what I'm going to do, and I'm just kind of doing some window dressing. I want to get my Kerbin periapsis, or not my Kerbin periapsis, my Duna periapsis, as close to the planet as possible, because the closer I can get, the better my rendezvous will be. And then coincidentally, I don't know, it's probably not a coincidence, but the closer I get to Duna, the longer I should be in Duna's influence, and the more speed that should take away from the spaceship as it's attracted to Duna. Although I know you can use planets as velocity assists, but I haven't really delved into the science of that. So I think I have that orbit all set up. and then we're just going to go and do the burn when we get there. So I should be orienting the ship to the proper direction, even though that is basically a month, 25 days in the future. And here comes the orientation. I do like this configuration. I kind of like this ship with the 3 outboard engines and then the 3 solar panels, stuff like that, and the big fuel tank. In theory, you could probably couple 2 of these together, like one behind the other, and put 3 more nuclear engines on the second one and kind of get a 6-engine interplanetary spaceship. So you can see us leaving the Kerbin system. You can see the moon and Kerbin receding into the distance as we time dilate, which is pretty cool. It's a nice, neat sight to see. And this is the first time I've taken Kerbals out of Kerbin orbit, so it's kind of a milestone for my space program. So we're going to go ahead and accelerate to where the next maneuver takes place. So here we are at our maneuver point. It's coming up to it, and we are decreasing the time warp and throttling up. So this will be a 2-minute burn. As you can see, I'm trusting that and starting my burn a minute early. So it should be pretty much spot on. And it is nice. The nuclear engines are nice because it does give you really good fuel economy. Now, in addition to the tanks here, and you can see that the ship has the main central tank and then 4 small outboard tanks. Each one of the probes has one of those outboard tanks as its own fuel source. So I am pushing 5 of those little tanks out to Duna for use by the probes. So in an emergency, I could pump that fuel in, but compared to the fuel I have on board, it would be relatively minuscule. So here we are doing the burn. You can see it ticking down. And the orbit is coming out to an adjustment, or adjusting out to where I wanted it. So let's just skip ahead a little bit and then see if we can actually rendezvous with Duna with this orbit. Okay, we're just about finished up with the maneuver right here. And I've deleted the node so I can see better, because sometimes the node stuff gets in the way. So I'm just doing the burn until I get an encounter. There's my encounter. I am throttling down. What I'm doing now, I still have the engines going. I am trying to get the periapsis as close to Duna as possible. So I'm going to continue to burn until, pardon me, until it starts going back up, and then I'm going to cut the engines. So you can see we're getting pretty darn close. It's not a bad intersect. Going pretty fast. And yep, now it's going back up. I kill the engines right here. And there you go. So I have Duna encounter right there. And I have about half my fuel left, a little less than half. Now I still have to do a fairly significant braking maneuver, but I should have enough certainly for that and any maneuvers I need within the Duna system, maneuvering between the planet and the moon or adjusting my orbit or whatnot. Getting back to Kerbin's a different story, but as I said, I have reserve fuel already in place there for just this type of eventuality. So here you can see the probes up close. That's what I'll be landing on the surface of Duna and Ike. I don't have any manned landers yet. That'll be a future mission. So the probes themselves have landing legs and a parachute and a landing engine. They're fairly robust. They have solar panel and batteries on them, so they can survive on the surface of the planet. I did put more batteries on them because I found on the surface of the moon that it gets the sun the day takes so long on the moon's surface that the batteries would run down. So I have a lot more battery power on the probes here than I do on the lunar probes or the moon probes, if you've watched that mission. So I'm setting the alarm clock for Duna intersect. And as you can see, we're dilating time. I'll just let it go because it's not going to take that long. You can see the planet and the spaceship are coming together very nicely. And you can see the alarm clock slowing the game down as it gets closer. So it didn't just go from full speed to stop. It actually slowed it down tick by tick almost, which was pretty neat. And there's Duna. You can see it in the distance. That's the first time, well, the first time with a manned mission I've gotten close enough to see it. Now, I did find it a little fiddly here for when you get to Duna, when you're in Duna orbit or not. Because when you put a maneuver node in, you don't want to click the line that's orbiting the sun. You want to click the line that you are in Duna's influence with for a maneuver node. Otherwise, your node timing will be way off. Oops. So we're going to do some braking maneuvers. Oh, there you go. There you go. So that's the actual Duna maneuver. So you can see there's my solar orbit. Going all the way out, and then here you can see where I'm in Duna's influence. I think it took a second. I remember fooling around with this, wondering why. I think it took a second to update to show Duna's influence and the fact that I was in it. So, since I'm pretty close to Duna and I have a lot of extra velocity, I decided to do an aero braking maneuver with the spaceship, where I actually go through Duna's atmosphere to help slow the ship down. Now, this is a fairly mild maneuver because I didn't want to smash the ship on the planet. I didn't want to do litho braking, as they say. I wanted to do aero braking. And I didn't want to slow it down so much that I didn't have enough velocity to escape the atmosphere, if you know what I mean. So as you can see, as I get closer, as I slow the ship down, Duna's effect becomes much, much more pronounced on the spaceship, so that it ends up going straight up, almost, out of Duna's influence. And it's going to curve back over, and I'll end up in what would be almost a polar orbit of Duna. I think right here what I need to do is check my periapsis to make sure it's not below the surface of the planet. Also, Ike tends to get in the way. Ike's Duna's moon, and it's pretty close to the planet. Okay, so there's an orbit. It's pretty close to the planet, and you can end up getting influenced by Ike or smashing into it or whatever if you're not careful. So I think there's actually an Ike encounter in that orbit right there, but I don't think it'll actually be a problem. So you can see the ship's maneuvering to a braking position. And I have to burn off 2,000 meters of delta V, as you can see, which is basically over 90% of my velocity. What's that, 95%? So you can see this is really where you pay for your extra velocity, because you have so much extra velocity that you have to, not only do you waste fuel adding extra velocity, you waste fuel burning off the extra velocity. And here starts the burn. I should probably turn my RCS off. And there's Duna right there, so you can see we're slowing our approach to Duna. So let's skip a little bit ahead and get to the interesting part where we get close. Okay, picking it up here, you can see we are pretty darn close to the planet of Duna. And what I'm doing right now is I am changing my orbit from the polar orbit to more of an equatorial orbit. So I'm doing a maneuver there. And I'm also going to be taking the ship within Duna's atmosphere for an aerobraking maneuver. I think you can see the periapsis is like 200 meters, which is obviously way too low. So we're going to have to fix that a little bit. But you can see now we're going in a nice equatorial approach rather than a polar approach. And I think actually the ship is now going to go below the surface of Duna, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, you can see it right here, where it's actually going to impact the surface, which is not at all what I want. Unless you're interested in lithobraking. So here comes another little maneuver to push it away from the planet a little bit. So I think I was a little bit timid. My understanding is Duna's atmosphere starts at about 50,000 meters up as opposed to Kerbin starting at 70,000 meters. So I think I take it down to about 30,000 or 25,000 meters. I probably could have gone a lot lower than that because Duna's atmosphere is not particularly thick. And it doesn't really slow you down that much. So I probably could have dropped it down significantly lower and gained more of a braking benefit from Duna's atmosphere. And here in this picture, you can see the two unmanned probes that are currently orbiting Duna. One I left in a polar orbit and one that is in more or less an equatorial orbit. So one issue I ran into before is you have to fold, I believe you need to fold the solar panels back up when you go into the atmosphere so they just don't rip off. So I put some auxiliary flat solar panels on the surface of the ship. That way, if for some reason it runs out of power, then it's not, or I forget to unfold the solar panels, it'll have some power source, which isn't really that big a deal for a manned ship. Yeah, it is 25,000 and change right there. Isn't a big a deal for a manned ship, but for an unmanned ship, once you run out of power, then your probe core does not respond, which kind of ruins your day. So I probably could have knocked 5 to 10,000 meters off of this quite safely. And so that's Ike right there, which we will be visiting in the future. And then Duna Duna is right there. So we're going to be approaching it on its right side. Right about there. We can watch as it becomes closer and closer. Cue the dramatic music. Yep, just over 25,000 meters. So it's kind of neat to see how close you can get, yet you're going so fast that it doesn't mean anything. Like you can be right next to the surface of Kerbin, burning at escape velocity, and right here you're that close to the surface of Duna, but you're going fast enough that you're just going to fly right on by unless you do something. It's kind of neat to see the forces involved. And I probably could be doing higher time acceleration. I didn't want to screw this up because obviously getting to Duna is not, for me, it's not super easy. And you can see we have about a fifth of our fuel left. Is that right? Actually, on the top it looks like about half full, and then on the stage 1 it looks like it's just fifth fuel full, I should say. So dropping below 100,000. And I think here's where I fold up the solar panels. It is pretty cool, you know, once you get close to the really large bodies, the really large planets, you know, how close you can get, and yet not be held. I realize I just said this, but not be held by the gravitational pull just because of your velocity and how all that works together. It's pretty neat in my opinion. And you can see where in the atmosphere right now, the time acceleration has dropped down to just 4 increments, and we are doing aero braking right now, although it's kind of hard to tell. Actually, the velocity is increasing as the planet pulls us toward it, because we're still approaching, and then we'll get down to about 25,000. So you can see my velocity is increasing regardless of the atmosphere, but in theory it helps. It's better than nothing, right? But the atmosphere on Duna is surprisingly thin. If you're working with Kerbin, I think you'll be surprised how little the atmosphere here influences you compared to Kerbin, and you'll see that when I start landing probes and using the parachute. And are we pulling away from the planet now? I do believe. Yes, you can see we're going up. This is on the dark side, so you can't really see that much. Well, we can see the sun, but it's not influencing the planet. Although you can see the, I forget what that's called, the terminus line or whatever with the, where the sun's hitting. Kind of a neat glow on the horizon. I think I'm just orienting the ship for further braking maneuvers. See the sun dropping below the horizon, so the ship is now no longer in the light. And what I do is I turn the nuclear engines or the main engines on just a bit because I realized that it didn't really slow me down as much as I had hoped it would. So I turned the engines on just a bit because I realized that we'll have to finish up the job. I don't know if there's any benefit to braking while you're still in the atmosphere, but as you can see, we're just leaving the atmosphere right now. So here comes the next braking maneuver. So we're going to skip ahead until we have achieved orbit. So here we are towards the end of the braking maneuvers. You can see we're still throttled up. And you can see the orbit. There you go. Curved around and achieved a Duna orbit. So you can see it once you get there, it happens pretty darn quickly. So you can see we're still right next to Duna, but our velocity is going to carry us out that far. As you can see, I'm still bleeding off of the velocity. And I think I take it down so that we are inside Ike's orbit, so I don't get influenced by Ike. And at this level, you just require a little bit of thrust to just bring it in. So you can see the engines are just barely on 1/3, and you can see how quickly it's coming in. The Apoasis. And there's an Ike encounter right there, which ends up with a screwy orbit, so you just ignore that. Just ignore that and continue braking. Keep calm and continue braking. That should be a bumper sticker. Keep calm and continue braking. And there goes the Ike encounter. And I want to get safely inside the orbit, so, Ike's orbit, so I don't get influenced by Ike. And I think right around there is good. And yes, there we throttle down. So, up, and you can see our periapsis is actually underground right now with all the braking maneuvers. I'll have to fix that. Otherwise, that would be a nasty surprise one orbit later. So we're going to go out to Apoasis and add a little velocity. As the ship majestically approaches Apoasis. It's kind of neat. You can see Ike move along, too. I guess it's pretty close to Duna compared to Kerbin's moon, so it's probably moving pretty quickly to stay in orbit, right? See, at the last second, I get tired of waiting and speed up. I should have done that earlier. And then we orient ourselves to do a prograde burn, correct? You see how slow we're moving at Apoasis, just 182 meters a second. And I think I'd bring that out. Did I bring it out to 100,000? No, actually, I guess I don't. Leave it pretty darn close. 70,000. Good enough for Duna, right? Okay, so now we are in orbit that we can start launching probes from.